An unexpected invitation, a secret kept for 5 years, 3 children he never imagined having. At the wedding of the Harrison family heir, the truth will come to light. This story is just beginning. Don't miss the surprising conclusion to this twist. Subscribe now and turn on notifications for more content. The afternoon sun bathed the shores of Newport with its characteristic golden tone, reflecting on the calm waters that rocked the boats anchored in the small harbor. Sitting at one of the tables at the seaside cafe, Emily Morgan absent-mindedly observed the horizon while the waiter served her coffee. At 32, she had built a simple but rewarding life, managing a small inn inherited from her grandmother in that historic coastal town in Rhode Island. The phone vibrated on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, her best friend since college days. "You won't believe what just arrived in the mail, an invitation to James's wedding." Emily felt her heart race, while her hands trembled slightly. James Harrison was a name she had tried to forget for the past 5 years. Son of one of the country's most traditional and influential families, heir to a coffee empire dating back to the early American settlers, he had been her great love and her greatest disappointment. "Are you sure? Why would he invite me?" she replied, trying to disguise the anxiety that name still caused her. "It arrived early today. It's printed on Italian paper with gold details, very ostentatious, typical of the Harrisons. He's marrying Elizabeth Blackwell in 3 weeks at the Imperial Estate." The Imperial Estate was the Harrison family's century-old property in the outskirts of Newport, a place Emily knew all too well. It was there that she and James met during a literary festival when she was still a literature student working as a volunteer at the event. It was also there that they spent moments she swore she had buried in the past. Emily paid for the coffee and walked slowly along the shore, absorbing the information. Why would James invite her to his wedding? After everything that happened, after the way it ended, this could only have one purpose: humiliation. He wanted her to witness his triumph, his perfect marriage to the heiress of another traditional family, a union that would certainly please the patriarchs of both families. When she arrived home, she found the envelope on the kitchen table. Sarah must have left it there earlier. It was exactly as her friend had described: imported paper, golden letters, the Harrison family crest subtly printed on the back. Inside, besides the formal invitation, there was a small, handwritten card. "Emily, I sincerely hope you can attend. It would be important to me. James." She laughed bitterly. Important? For what? To show how he had overcome that youthful mistake she represented? To show society that he was now making the right choice, marrying someone of his social level? What? James didn't know. What no one besides Sarah and the doctor knew was that this story had a chapter he was completely unaware of. A chapter that would change everything. Emily went up the stairs of her house and stopped in front of a door at the end of the corridor. She took a deep breath before opening it. Inside the room, decorated in shades of green and yellow, 3 4-year-old children were playing under the supervision of Mrs. Wilson, the nanny who had been helping her since the birth of the triplets. "Mommy!" exclaimed Michael, the most talkative of the 3, running to hug her legs. Soon after, Anthony and Sophia followed their brother, surrounding Emily with that energy that only children possess. Looking at the 3 identical faces, it was impossible not to see James in them. The same green eyes, the same face shape, the same smile, the same dimple on the chin that had been the Harrison family trademark for generations. "How was your day, my loves?" she asked, crouching down to hug all 3 at once. While the children animatedly recounted their day's adventures, Emily thought about the invitation. Perhaps it was time for James to meet his children, not out of revenge, but because they deserved to know who their father was, and he deserved to know he was a father. When she discovered the pregnancy, 5 years ago, James had already ended the relationship. The reason? Family pressure. "We're from different worlds, Emily. My family would never accept it," he had said, with that expression of someone who apologizes, but not enough to make the difficult choice. She tried to contact him to tell him about the pregnancy, but her messages were never answered. Her calls never returned. Over time, she heard from acquaintances that he had traveled to London, supposedly to complete his business degree. In reality, she suspected that the family had sent him away precisely to cut off any possibility of returning to that inappropriate relationship. When the triplets were born, Emily still considered approaching the Harrisons, but pride spoke louder. If they judged her inadequate, if James didn't have the courage to fight for her, why would she beg for recognition? She would raise her children alone with the help of friends and the small inn that, thanks to her hard work, prospered each year. That night, after putting the children to bed, Emily sat on the house porch with a glass of wine. The invitation was still on the table, illuminated by the soft light of the lamps. Sarah arrived shortly after, finding her friend lost in thought. "So, are you going to the wedding?" she asked bluntly, also helping herself to a glass. "I'm thinking about going, but not alone." "You're not considering?" "James deserves to know, and if he's really going to get married, the bride also deserves to know who she's getting involved with." "Emily, that will cause a scandal." "Maybe that's exactly what that family needs. A bit of truth to shake their certainties." Sarah knew that determined tone in her friend's voice. She knew that when Emily made a decision, nothing would change her mind. "If you're really going to do this, we need to prepare. You'll be entering their territory. The Harrisons have influence, they have power." "And I have the truth," replied Emily, looking towards the room where her children slept. "And I have 3 irrefutable proofs of it." What James didn't imagine was that his calculated gesture, that invitation sent to demonstrate superiority, was about to open a door that would forever change the course of many lives. In 3 weeks at the Imperial Estate, it wouldn't be just a wedding at stake, but revelations that could redraw the power map of families that, for generations, had determined their own destinies as if moving pieces on a board. And Emily, the commoner who once dared to dream of a place in that exclusive world, would return not as an embarrassed guest, but as someone who carried with her the power to transform a wedding into a reckoning with the past. The days that followed the receipt of the invitation were intense for Emily. Each decision needed to be meticulously planned. It wasn't just about showing up at the wedding. She needed to ensure that the triplets were prepared to meet a world completely different from what they were used to, and more importantly, to meet their father. In the most elegant boutique in Newport, Emily was trying on a red dress that enhanced her silhouette. Beside her, Sarah observed with a critical expression. "Red? Seriously, Emily, you're going to look like the villain from a soap opera." "I don't want to hide," replied Emily, twirling in front of the mirror. "If I'm going to face the Harrisons, let it be with all colors. You're not going to war, you're going to reveal to a man that he has 3 children, children who, by the way, also need appropriate clothes." Emily sighed, recognizing the wisdom in her friend's words. She opted for a teal blue dress, elegant without being ostentatious. For the children, she chose outfits that matched, further highlighting the resemblance between them. During the preparations, memories of the past returned like insistent flashbacks. Emily remembered the summer 5 years ago when she met James during the Newport Literary Festival. She was just a volunteer assigned to accompany the speakers, and he was there representing the Harrison Foundation, the main sponsor of the event. The attraction was immediate. Against all odds, they began a relationship that lasted almost a year, a period that Emily considered the happiest and also the most painful of her life. "What are you going to tell him?" asked Sarah as they walked along the shore after shopping. "The truth, that I tried to contact him when I discovered the pregnancy but never got a response, that I decided to raise our children alone because I didn't want to impose anything on anyone." "And if he accuses you of being after the Harrison money?" Emily stopped, looking fixedly at her friend. "That's why I've kept every contact attempt, every unanswered email, every call record. I know how that family thinks. I know they'll try to discredit me." What Emily didn't tell anyone, not even Sarah, was that during all those years, she had maintained a detailed diary of everything, dates, exact words from the few encounters with the Harrison family, rumors she heard about the family business. At first, it was just a way to vent. Then it became almost a compulsion to document every detail of that incomplete story. In downtown Newport, in a discreet office near the main church, Emily had an appointment scheduled with Mr. Ryan Anderson, the lawyer who had been advising her since the birth of the triplets. "If you're really going to do this, we need to prepare for all possibilities," said the lawyer, adjusting his glasses while reviewing some documents. "The Harrisons have the best lawyers in the country. They will question paternity, they will investigate your life, they will try to disqualify you as a mother. DNA tests will resolve the paternity issue," replied Emily, calmly. "As for the rest, I have nothing to hide. And are you prepared for the consequences? If James recognizes the children, he will have rights over them. He can demand visits. He can want to participate in decisions about education, health." That possibility made Emily hesitate for the first time. For 5 years, she had been the only one to decide on raising her children. The idea of sharing that power with someone who abandoned them before they were even born caused an uncomfortable feeling. "One step at a time, Mr. Anderson. First, let's go to the wedding." That night, while putting the triplets to bed, Emily found herself observing every detail of the children's faces. How much did they know about their father? Just what she told them in bedtime stories, that he was a man who traveled a lot, that one day he would meet them, that sometimes adults have complicated lives. "Mommy, tell again that story about the prince who lived in the coffee castle," asked Sophia, nestling into her pillow. That was how Emily spoke of James, as a prince, in a castle made of coffee beans. A metaphor that the children loved, and that in a way wasn't so far from reality. The Harrisons' imperial estate was practically a castle, and the family's coffee empire was one of the largest in the country. "Once upon a time, there was a prince who lived in a huge castle surrounded by seas of coffee," began Emily, sitting on the edge of the bed. "One day he met a simple girl who took care of magical books." As she narrated the romanticized story of her meeting with James, Emily wondered if she was doing the right thing. Exposing the children to that potentially traumatic situation would be worth it. But at the same time, as they grew, they would ask more questions. One day, the story of the prince who travels a lot would no longer be enough. The next morning, a week before the wedding, Emily received an unexpected call. The caller ID showed Imperial Estate. "Hello? Emily? This is Victoria Harrison." The voice of the family matriarch made Emily freeze. Victoria, James's mother, had been one of the main opponents of their relationship. "Mrs. Harrison, what? A surprise. I heard you confirmed your attendance at my son's wedding." Straight to the point, as always, Victoria had never been a woman of detours. "Yes," I confirmed. "James made a point of inviting me personally." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had a different tone, almost conciliatory. "I'd like to invite you for tea tomorrow here at the estate. There are matters we need to discuss before the big day." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Victoria Harrison never made a move without calculating all the consequences. "What kind of matters, Mrs. Harrison?" "I prefer to discuss in person. Let's just say it's in everyone's interest that certain situations are resolved before the wedding." After hanging up, Emily immediately called Sarah. "I think they know," she said as soon as her friend answered. "Know? About the children? How?" "I don't know. But Victoria invited me for tea at the Imperial Estate tomorrow. She said we need to resolve certain situations before the wedding." "That's a trap, Emily. She's going to try to buy your silence." "Probably. But it's an opportunity to understand their game before making my move." "You're not going alone. I'm going with you." "No, Sarah. If it's a trap, I need to face it alone." While organizing her thoughts, Emily went to the drawer where she kept important documents and took out a blue folder. Inside, besides the triplets' birth certificates, there was a sealed envelope containing something she had never shown to anyone: the letters she had written to James during the pregnancy that were returned unopened, and copies of the unanswered. Her emails. If Victoria Harrison wanted to play, Emily would be prepared. The insecure young woman who once fell in love with the coffee plantation heir had grown, matured, and learned to fight. And this time, she wasn't just fighting for herself, but for 3 children who deserved to know their origins. their complete history. The next day, as she headed to the imperial estate, Emily felt the weight of the decision she had made. She was about to confront not just Victoria Harrison, but an entire past that she had tried to leave behind. And depending on the outcome of this meeting, the future could take unimaginable turns. The road that led to the imperial estate wound through hills covered with verdant coffee plantations. Emily observed the familiar landscape through the taxi window, feeling a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. 5 years had passed since the last time she traveled that road, but each curve, each century-old tree seemed to greet her like an old acquaintance. Upon spotting the main gate of the property, imposing with its stone columns topped by bronze eagles, the Harrison symbol, Emily took a deep breath. The driver stopped in front of the guardhouse, where a security guard in a dark suit checked her name on a list. "Ms. Morgan, Mrs. Harrison is waiting for you at the main house." With a nod, the security guard allowed passage, and the taxi advanced down the avenue of imperial palms that led to the mansion. The house, a neoclassical construction from the 19th century, rose majestically at the top of a small elevation, with its white facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. As she got out of the car, Emily adjusted the modest dress she had chosen for the occasion. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that could be interpreted as provocation. Her black hair was tied in a simple bun, and her makeup was discreet. If she was going to face Victoria Harrison on her territory, let it be with dignity. A middle-aged housekeeper, whom Emily recognized as Mrs. Miller, the same one who worked in the house when she frequented the place, came to receive her at the entrance. "Miss Emily, good to see you again," said the woman with a contained smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The madame is on the back veranda. Please follow me." As they walked through the corridors of the mansion, Emily noticed small changes in the decoration, but the essence remained the same. Paintings of illustrious ancestors, antique furniture imported from Europe, art objects carefully arranged in showcases. The back veranda was a large glassed-in space that opened onto the property's geometric gardens. In the background, beyond the gardens, stretched the green sea of coffee plantations that had made the family's fortune. Seated in a wicker armchair with impeccable posture was Victoria Harrison. "Emily, punctual as always," said the matriarch, indicating the chair in front of her. "Please sit down." At 65, Victoria maintained the elegance and posture that had made her famous in the country's social circles. Her grey hair was perfectly arranged in a classic style, and the discreet but obviously valuable jewelry complemented her pastel silk outfit. "Mrs. Harrison, thank you for the invitation," replied Emily, sitting with a straight back, unconsciously mirroring the host's posture. The housekeeper served tea in Chinese porcelain cups, the same set that Emily remembered seeing on special occasions when she visited the estate with James. The aroma of jasmine filled the environment, mixing with the perfume of roses from the garden. "I imagine you're wondering about the reason for this meeting," said Victoria, after a delicate sip of tea. "I confess I'm curious," replied Emily, maintaining the polite tone. Victoria placed the cup on the saucer with a precise movement and looked directly at Emily. "Let's be frank, my dear. We know why James invited you to the wedding, and we know what you intend to do." Emily felt her heart accelerate, but maintained a neutral expression. "And what do I intend to do, according to you? Cause a scene? Perhaps try to stop the wedding with some dramatic revelation. It's understandable, given your history, but unnecessary." Emily allowed herself a small smile. "You seem very well informed about my intentions." "I have my resources," replied Victoria, with a vague gesture of her hand adorned with an emerald ring. "The question is, what can we do to avoid unnecessary embarrassment?" "Perhaps you could be more specific." Victoria sighed, as if dealing with a particularly obtuse child. "Emily, we are both adult women. Let's get to the point. How much?" "How much?" repeated Emily, genuinely confused. "How much would your absence at the wedding cost? I'm willing to make a generous offer for my family's peace of mind." The indignation that Emily felt at that moment was almost suffocating. So that was it. Victoria thought she could simply buy her silence, as she had probably done with so many other inconveniences over the years. Mrs. Harrison, I think you misunderstood the reason why I accepted James's invitation. Enlighten. Me then? Replied Victoria with a touch of impatience in her voice. Emily placed her cup on the side table and looked directly into the matriarch's eyes. I'm not interested in money, I never was. What brings me here is something much more valuable and that cannot be bought. And what would that be? The truth, Mrs. Harrison, the truth that was denied to James and me during all these years. A glimmer of concern passed through Victoria's eyes, so quickly that Emily almost doubted having seen it. What truth, my dear? You had a romance, it didn't work, and now my son is moving on with someone more, suitable for the responsibilities that await him. The truth about why our relationship really ended, the truth about the letters that never reached him, the truth about the 3 children he doesn't know he has. The last sentence fell like a bomb in the tranquil environment. The color drained from Victoria's face, and for the first time since, Emily had known her. The matriarch seemed genuinely shaken. That's absurd, Victoria finally said, recovering part of her composure. You're making this up to extort my family. Emily opened her purse and removed an envelope, placing it on the table between them. Here are copies of my children's birth certificates. Michael, Anthony, and Sophia, born on July 12, 2021. Triplets. Any DNA test will confirm that James is the father. Victoria didn't touch the envelope, but her gaze fixed on it as if she could incinerate it with just the force of her will. Let's suppose it's true, she said after a long silence. Why wait until now, on the eve of the wedding, to reveal this? Because for 5 years I tried to contact James without success. Because when I discovered the pregnancy, he had already left for London. And I presume you now want recognition, child support, a part of the Harrison inheritance for your children. Emily kept her voice firm, despite the growing indignation. What I want is for my children to know their father, and for him to know he's a father. They have that right. Victoria rose in a fluid movement and walked to one of the windows, observing the gardens in silence. When she spoke again, her voice had a different tone, almost reconciliatory. You know what this wedding represents for our family, don't you? The union with the Blackwells is not just a marriage, it's an alliance that will ensure the stability of both family empires for generations. I'm not interested in your business deals, Mrs. Harrison. The matriarch turned, facing Emily with a calculating expression. Perhaps you should be. The future of your children, if they really are James's children, is also at stake. Before Emily could respond, the veranda door opened and a familiar figure entered the environment. Emily's heart raced as she recognized James Harrison. At 35, he was even more attractive than she remembered. The well-cut suit accentuated his broad shoulders, and his black hair, now with discreet grey strands at the temples, gave him an air of maturity he didn't possess 5 years ago. His green eyes, the same eyes she saw daily in her children's faces, widened in surprise upon seeing her. Emily, what are you doing here? Your mother invited me for tea, she replied, standing up. We were having a quite interesting conversation. Victoria quickly intervened. James, darling, I didn't know you'd be back so early from the city. Evidently, he replied, with his eyes fixed on Emily. What is this meeting about? A heavy silence fell over the veranda. Emily stared at James, wondering how many lies he had heard over the years, how much of the truth had been distorted by the family that claimed to protect him. Your mother was about to make me an offer, Emily finally said, for me not to attend your wedding. James turned to his mother, his expression oscillating between disbelief and fury. Is this true, Mother? James, there are things you don't understand. Decisions that need to be made for the greater good of the family. For God's sake, we're in 2026, not the 19th century. You can't simply manipulate people as if they were pieces in a game. Victoria maintained her unwavering posture, but a slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nervousness. Everything I've ever done was for your good, for the good of the Harrison family. James ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Emily remembered well. Emily, he said, turning to face her, Why did you accept my invitation? After everything that happened, why would you come back here? It was the question Emily had been expecting from the moment she received the invitation, the question for which she had prepared for weeks. Now, faced with the man she once loved and the father of her children, she felt the carefully rehearsed words fleeing from her mind. Because there's something you need to know, James, something that will change everything. Their gazes met in a moment, loaded with unresolved memories and untold truths. The air on the veranda seemed heavy with the weight of the revelations to come. "What does this mean?" asked James, looking from the envelope on the table to Emily's determined face. At that instant, a new figure appeared at the veranda entrance, Elizabeth Blackwell, James's fiancée, elegant in her white linen outfit. Her confused gaze alternated between those present, capturing the palpable tension in the environment. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked in a polite but clearly intrigued voice. The moment of revelation would have to wait. Emily realized that this was not the place nor the time for the truth she carried. That truth deserved a bigger stage, exactly as James had planned with his provocative invitation. Emily's return to Newport after the confrontation at the Imperial Estate was marked by a storm that seemed to mirror the turbulence inside her. Heavy raindrops lashed the taxi windows as she relived each moment of the meeting with Victoria and James. Elizabeth's unexpected arrival had interrupted what promised to be an explosive revelation, but perhaps it was better that way. Emily wanted her children to be present when James learned the truth. "So, how was it?" asked Sarah, as soon as Emily entered the house, soaked by the rain that had caught her on the path from the sidewalk to the door. "Interesting," replied Emily, accepting the towel her friend offered. "Victoria tried to buy me." "I knew it. How much did she offer?" "We didn't get to discuss values. When I mentioned the triplets, the conversation took another turn." Emily narrated the meeting in detail, including James's surprise arrival and the subsequent interruption by Elizabeth. "He seemed genuinely surprised to see me there," she concluded as she dried her hair. "Which makes me think that maybe he doesn't know his mother is trying to manipulate the guests of his own wedding. Or he's an excellent actor," pondered Sarah. "Don't forget that he was educated in this world of appearances and power games." That night, after putting the children to bed, Emily received a message that made her heart race. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Belvedere Cafe. James." Belvedere Cafe was a small establishment in historic downtown Newport, known for its discretion and select clientele. It was also one of Emily and James's favorite places during the time they were together, a detail she doubted was a coincidence. The next day, promptly at 2 p.m., Emily entered the cafe. The place was almost empty, except for a couple of tourists at a distant table, and James seated by the window overlooking the sea. When he saw her, he stood up, hesitant about how to greet her. "Thank you for coming," he said, opting for a formal nod. "Your message didn't leave much room for refusal," replied Emily, sitting down. A waiter approached to take their orders, an espresso for James, a cappuccino for Emily. The familiarity of that ritual after so many years caused a moment of silent discomfort in both. "About yesterday," began James, as soon as the waiter moved away. "I want to apologize for my mother's behavior. She had no right to make that approach." "It's not the first time your mother has tried to keep me away from you," observed Emily. A shadow passed over James's face. "What do you mean by that?" Emily took a deep breath. It was time to start unraveling the web of lies that separated them. "When we broke up 5 years ago, you said you were going to London to complete your studies, and that it would be better for us to go our separate ways. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember. It was the hardest decision of my life. And you never wondered why I didn't respond to any of your letters from London. Why I never returned your calls." Confusion stamped itself on James's face. "Your letters? My calls? Emily, you never responded to my contact attempts. I wrote dozens of letters during the first months in London, called countless times. When I got no response, I understood that you had moved on." Now it was Emily who seemed confused. "James, I never received any letter from you, any call. On the contrary, I tried to contact you in every possible way when I discovered I was pregnant. but all my attempts were ignored. The silence that followed was loaded with painful understanding. Both were beginning to perceive the elaborate game of manipulation of which they had been victims. "Pregnant?" repeated James finally, his voice almost a whisper. "You were pregnant when I went to London. I found out 2 weeks after you left. I tried to call you, sent emails, letters. When nothing worked, I went to the Imperial Estate, but was barred at the entrance. I received the clear message that I wasn't welcome." "My God," murmured James, passing his hands over his face in a gesture of despair. "And what happened? With the pregnancy, I mean." Emily took the cell phone from her purse, opening the photo. Gallery. Without saying a word, she showed James a recent photo of the triplets at their 5th birthday, 3 months earlier. "Are these your children?" he asked, his voice charged with emotion. "Our children," corrected Emily. "Michael, Anthony, and Sophia." James took the phone with trembling hands, enlarging the image to better see the children's faces. It was impossible to deny the resemblance. The same green eyes, the same face shape, even the dimple on the chin that was a Harrison family trademark. "Triplets?" he asked, incredulous. "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," replied Emily, with a small smile. "When I found out there would be 3, I almost fainted in the doctor's office." James returned the phone, his expression a mixture of wonder and despair. 5 years, he murmured. "I lost 5 years of their lives. There. First steps, first words, everything. It wasn't your choice. James, from what I'm understanding, we were both manipulated." He nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "My mother, and probably my father too. They never approved of our relationship. They thought you were a temporary distraction." "Distraction? Is that how they saw what we had?" "You know how their mentality is. For the Harrisons, marriages are strategic alliances, not matters of the heart. When I met Elizabeth—" "Your perfect fiancé," completed Emily, unable to completely hide the bitterness in her voice. "A perfect arrangement for the families," corrected James. "The Blackwells control the country's largest export conglomerate. The union of the families would practically guarantee the market monopoly." "And love? Where does it fit in that equation?" James averted his gaze, fixing it on the sea that stretched beyond the window. "I learned to like Elizabeth. She's intelligent, educated, understanding. But she's not the woman you love," ventured Emily. "Does that matter? After what we discovered today, what matters is that I have 3 children who don't even know me." "They know you through my stories," said Emily. "I tell them about the Prince of the Coffee Castle every night." A melancholy smile formed on James's lips. "Prince, I don't feel very noble now. It wasn't your fault, James." "No? Maybe if I had questioned more, investigated. Maybe if I hadn't so easily accepted that you simply forgot me. And maybe if I had been more persistent, if I had found a way to break through the blockade your family created." They were silent for a few moments, each absorbing the weight of the revelations and the lost possibilities. "I want to meet them," James finally said. "My children, our children. I want to be part of their lives, make up for lost time. That's why I accepted your invitation to the wedding, so you could meet them, so the truth would come out, regardless of the consequences." James frowned, a new understanding illuminating his face. "Wait. You were going to bring our children to my wedding, show up with 3 children identical to me in the middle of the ceremony?" Emily nodded without averting her gaze. "That was the plan. You invited me to humiliate me, didn't you? To show how you moved on, how I was just a closed chapter in your life." It was James's turn to look genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "I didn't invite you to humiliate you. I invited you because I could never completely forget you. Because I wanted to see you one last time before officiating a commitment that would seal my future forever." The revelation caught Emily by surprise. All her assumptions, all the narrative she had built in her mind crumbled before that simple confession. "This changes everything," she murmured. "Yes, it changes," agreed James. "And the wedding is scheduled for 5 days from now." "The coffee?" once hot, was now cold in the untouched cups. Time seemed to have distended while both absorbed the implications of everything that had been revealed. "What do you intend to do?" Emily finally asked. "I don't know. I need to confront my parents, discover the extent of this manipulation, and I need to talk to Elizabeth. She deserves to know the truth before committing to someone like me." "Someone like you?" "Someone who will never be completely hers. Someone who now has 3 children and an unresolved history." James ran his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Emily knew well. "I want to meet my children, Emily. Today, if possible. They're at school now, but we can schedule for late afternoon if you want." "I want to, more than anything in the world." When they separated at the cafe exit, there was a new understanding between them, a silent promise that, this time, they wouldn't allow anyone or anything to manipulate them again. The truth, for so long buried under elaborate lies, finally began to emerge, and with it, consequences that neither could completely predict. Back at the Imperial Estate, James found his parents and Elizabeth gathered in the library, discussing the final details of the wedding. Upon seeing him enter with a grave expression, Victoria immediately sensed trouble. "Where have you been all afternoon, son?" she asked, trying to maintain a casual tone. "The florist is waiting for your approval for the altar arrangements." "I've been discovering truths that you hid from me for 5 years," he replied, looking directly at his parents. "Truths about Emily, about intercepted letters, about a concealed pregnancy." The silence that followed was the confirmation he didn't need, but that hurt nonetheless. The guilty expression of his father, Richard Harrison, and his mother's defiant look said it all. "We have 3 children, Mother. 3 5-year-old children I've never met, because you and Father decided they weren't suitable for the future you planned for. Me." Elizabeth, who until then had been observing the scene in silence, stood with dignity. "I think you need privacy for this conversation," she said, heading for the door. "No, Elizabeth," interrupted James. "You also deserve to hear the truth. You deserve to know who you're about to marry." The tension in the air was palpable, as the family faced a crisis that threatened to shake not just a wedding, but the entire carefully constructed Harrison empire. Emily's small house, with its blue walls and white windows, never seemed so welcoming and at the same time so intimidating as that afternoon. Seated on the porch, James waited nervously, his restless hands betraying the anxiety he felt. Within minutes he would meet his children. 3 children who shared his blood, his genes, but who until a few hours ago were complete strangers to him. Emily had agreed to pick them up from school and bring them directly home, where she would explain the situation in the simplest and gentlest way possible. 5-year-old children have a surprising capacity to accept changes as long as they feel safe, she had said before leaving. James wasn't sure if he shared that optimism. The confrontation with his parents had been tense and revealing. Richard Harrison, the family patriarch, initially tried to deny any involvement in the scheme to separate his son from Emily, but ended up admitting that he knew about the intercepted letters and the concealed pregnancy. "We did what we thought was best for the future of the family," argued Richard, when finally confronted with the evidence. "The Harrisons have a responsibility to the legacy we've built over generations." "A legacy built on lies," retorted James, his disappointment evident in every word. Victoria, always more pragmatic, tried a different angle. "James, darling, try to see the situation from another perspective. If we had allowed that relationship to continue, where would you be today? Probably living in some modest apartment in Newport, managing that inn, completely disconnected from the world to which you belong. And would that be so terrible? Being with the woman I love, raising our children together." "Feelings pass, son," replied Victoria, with the certainty of someone who deeply believed in her own words. "Family interests remain. The marriage with Elizabeth will ensure the stability of the Harrison empire for generations." Elizabeth, who had been observing the exchange in silence, finally spoke up. "And what am I in this whole story? Just a convenient pawn on your board?" Her voice, normally controlled, trembled slightly, the only sign of the emotional storm that certainly raged inside her. James felt a wave of guilt. Elizabeth didn't deserve to be involved in this situation. She had entered the relationship with absolute good faith, believing she was building a future with a man free of past complications. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry," said James, turning to his fiancée. "You deserve someone who can give you everything. Heart, soul, total commitment, not someone divided like me." To everyone's surprise, Elizabeth didn't show the expected reaction of hurt or indignation. Instead, a sad smile formed on her lips. "James, I always knew your heart belonged to someone else. I accepted it because I believed that with time we could build something meaningful together. But children, that changes everything." Her words were loaded with a maturity that made James admire her even more, increasing his guilt for not being able to love her as she deserved. "The wedding is cancelled," he announced, looking at his parents. "I cannot proceed with this knowing what I know now." "You can't simply cancel," protested Victoria, standing up. "There are signed contracts, ongoing business agreements, more than 400 confirmed guests." "Mother, we're talking about my life. The lives of 3 innocent children who have the right to know their father." Richard, who had remained silent after his confession, cleared his throat to call attention. "Perhaps there's a solution that contemplates all the interests involved," he said, with the calculating tone that had made him famous in business. "Circles. We officially recognize the children as Harrisons, guarantee first-class education, a generous pension for Emily, participation in company profits when they reach majority. And the wedding would proceed as planned," completed Victoria, immediately grasping her husband's strategy. James shook his head, incredulous at his parents' capacity to transform even such a personal situation into a business negotiation. "It's not a question of money or status. It's a question of honesty, of doing what's right." "And what is right, James?" questioned Richard. "Abandoning a commitment made with the Blackwell family, risking a conflict between 2 of the most powerful families in the country, putting at risk thousands of jobs that depend on the stability of our businesses." Elizabeth, who until then had been listening to the discussion with a thoughtful expression, intervened. "I think we all need time to process what happened today. Decisions made in the heat of the moment are rarely the best." With that, she left the library with the same dignity with which she had conducted the entire situation. James followed her to the corridor, feeling that he owed her at least a more complete explanation. "Elizabeth, I didn't plan any of this. I swear I didn't know about the children." "I believe you," she replied, lightly touching his face. "You've always been an honest man, James. It's one of the qualities that made me accept this arranged marriage. But now you need to be honest with yourself about what you really want." After that confrontation, James had driven straight to Newport, to Emily's house, determined to meet his children and begin to repair the lost time. And now, sitting on the porch overlooking the sea, he awaited the moment that would forever change his life. The sound of a car approaching pulled him from his thoughts. It was Emily's small SUV parking in front of the house. His heart accelerated when he saw her get out of the vehicle and open the back door. 3 small figures jumped out animatedly, wearing the uniforms of the local school. 2 boys and a girl, from what he could distinguish from a distance. "Remember what we talked about," said Emily to the children as they walked towards the house. "We have a very special visitor today." When they approached close enough, James could finally see his children's faces clearly. The resemblance was even more impressive than in the photos. It was like looking at miniaturized versions of himself with some softened traits of Emily. "Children," said Emily, stopping in front of the porch, "this is James. Remember the stories about the Prince of the Coffee Castle? It's him." The triplets looked simultaneously at James with that frank curiosity typical of childhood. It was Michael, the most extroverted according to Emily, who spoke. "First, are you really a prince?" James smiled, descending the porch steps to be at the children's height. "No, I'm not a real prince. Your mother likes to make up stories." "But do you live in a castle?" asked Sophia, the only girl with the same green eyes as her father, but her mother's dark, curly hair. "It's a big old house, surrounded by coffee plantations," explained James, feeling the emotion grow in his chest before those curious looks. It's not exactly a castle. Anthony, the most observant and quiet of the three, just studied him intensely, as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. "You look like us," he finally said, pointing to his own face. "We have the same eyes," Emily intervened gently. "Remember when you asked me about your daddy and I said he lived far away working?" The three children nodded, still fixed on James. "James is your father," she said, carefully observing their reactions. "And he came to meet you today." A brief silence followed the revelation. Then, to everyone's surprise, Michael stepped forward and formally extended his hand. "Pleased to meet you, sir. I am Michael Morgan Harrison." James felt tears form in his eyes as he shook that small hand. The boy had added Harrison to his own name, even without ever having officially used the surname. "The pleasure is all mine, Michael." Sophia was next, not extending her hand but throwing herself into a spontaneous hug that almost knocked James over. "Are you going to live with us now? Will you take me to school every day like Juliana's dad does?" The question, so direct and hopeful, pierced James's heart like an arrow. "I don't know exactly how it's going to work yet, Sophia, but I promise I'll always be present in your lives from now on." Anthony, still cautious, remained slightly distant. "Why did you never come to see us before?" he asked with a seriousness surprising for a 5-year-old child. The question James most feared. How to explain years of absence to a child? How to talk about family manipulation, intercepted letters, power games? "It's complicated, Anthony," he began, opting for sincerity. "I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I would have come much earlier, believe me." "Don't the people in your family like us?" persisted the boy, demonstrating impressive insight. Emily and James exchanged concerned looks. It was evident that the children, especially Anthony, captured more of their surroundings than adults imagined. "They don't know you yet," replied James carefully. "But they'll love you when they meet you, I'm sure." Emily suggested they go inside and talk more over a snack. While the children ran inside to wash their hands, she and James were briefly alone. "They're amazing," he said, his voice charged with emotion. "Intelligent, perceptive." "Yes, they are," agreed Emily with evident pride, "and each with such a distinct personality, even being genetically identical. Michael is the natural leader, Sophia the sensitive artist, and Anthony the little philosopher." "Thank you," murmured James, impulsively holding Emily's hand. "Thank you for giving them such a good life, even alone." "I did no more than my obligation," she replied, gently withdrawing her hand. "And I was never completely alone. I have wonderful friends, a community that supports us." The afternoon passed in a climate of mutual discovery. James sat on the living room carpet to see Sophia's drawings, listened attentively to Michael's explanations about his favorite video game, and patiently answered Anthony's philosophical questions about why the sky is blue and if stars feel lonely. When the time came to leave, he felt as if he was leaving a part of himself behind. He promised to return the next day and the next, and on all the days he could manage before resolving the situation of the imminent wedding. "What are you going to do now?" asked Emily, when the triplets were already entertained with their toys in the room. "Honestly, I don't know. The wedding is scheduled for 4 days from now. Elizabeth knows everything now, as do my parents. But there are consequences that go far beyond personal emotions." "The Harrison Empire," commented Emily, with a touch of irony. "It's not just that. There are people who depend on the stability of our businesses, employees, suppliers, entire communities in the countryside that live off the coffee plantations. And you carry all that weight on your shoulders?" "It's my family's legacy," he replied with a tired sigh. "I grew up hearing that the Harrisons have responsibilities greater than individual desires." Emily observed him for a moment, recognizing in him the same internal conflict she had seen 5 years before, the man divided between heart and duty, between his own desires and the expectations imposed by generations of family tradition. "Your children are also Harrisons," she said, softly. "They are also part of that legacy now." The words hung between them like a possibility not yet completely formed, but that was beginning to take more definite contours. Perhaps there was a path that could reconcile the past and the future, traditions, and new possibilities. Or perhaps it was time to break with century-old expectations and write a new story. When leaving Emily's house that night, James knew that any decision he made in the coming days would be irrevocable. The marriage with Elizabeth, the public recognition of the children, the confrontation with family traditions. Each path led to a completely different future. As he drove back to the imperial estate, a storm was forming on the horizon, lightning, occasionally illuminating the dark sky. Nature seemed to mirror the turbulence he felt inside, the battle between duty and desire, between the destiny traced by others and what his heart now claimed as truly his. The next morning, James found an envelope sliding under his bedroom door. Inside there was a letter written in Elizabeth's elegant handwriting. "We need to talk. I'll wait for you in the rose garden at noon. Come with an open heart. E." The message, enigmatic and at the same time direct, left him intrigued. What could Elizabeth have decided in such a short time? The rose garden, located at the back of the imperial estate, was an almost mythical space for the Harrison family. Created by James's great-grandmother more than a century ago, the place preserved rare species of roses brought from Europe, arranged in concentric circles around a small white gazebo. It was in this gazebo that Elizabeth awaited him, elegant, in a light linen dress with her brown hair loose in the wind. "Thank you for coming," she said when James approached. "I wasn't sure if you would appear." "Your letter intrigued me," he replied, sitting on the bench beside her, "and I must admit I'm surprised by your calmness in the face of all this." Elizabeth smiled, a melancholy smile that didn't completely reach her eyes. "James, we grew up in the same world. We both know how marriages work in our families. When I agreed to marry you, I did so with open eyes, knowing it wasn't a fairy tale, but a strategic alliance. That doesn't make the situation less unfair to you." "Maybe not," she agreed. "But life is rarely fair, especially for women in our position. We were born to fulfill a role, to occupy a predetermined place on the great family board." James observed her with a new perspective. During the 2 years of dating and engagement, Elizabeth had always seemed like a person adapted to her social role, comfortable with the expectations that fell upon her. Now, for the first time, he realized that perhaps there was much more behind that perfect facade. "What do you really want, Elizabeth? Not what your family expects, not what tradition dictates, but what you as a person desire for your life." The question seemed to catch her by surprise. For a moment, an unusual vulnerability showed in her eyes. "No one has ever asked me that before," she said, after a moment of reflection. "It was always about which college would be most appropriate, which career would best complement the role of wife and future matriarch, which marriage would strengthen the family's position. And if you could choose freely." "I always wanted to study archaeology," she confessed with a small smile. "Travel the world, discover lost civilizations, immerse myself in cultures different from ours. But that was never a real option. For me." "Why not?" "You know well why. A Blackwell doesn't abandon her family duties to venture into excavations abroad." James felt a wave of empathy for Elizabeth. Suddenly he realized they were more alike than he had imagined. Both prisoners, of expectations and traditions they hadn't chosen. And now, he asked, "What happens with us?" Elizabeth slowly removed the engagement ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to James's great-grandmother. "This ring belongs to another story, not ours," she said, placing it in his hand. "You have 3 children, James. Children who need a present father, not one divided between 2 worlds. Are you ending our engagement? I'm freeing us both, you to assume your real family, me to perhaps finally discover who I am beyond the name I carry. But the wedding, the contracts, the alliance between the families? Let our parents deal with that. They've caused enough damage with their manipulations. It's time they faced the consequences." The firmness in Elizabeth's voice surprised James. There was a strength in her that he had never noticed before, a resolution that showed a much deeper character than appeared. "What will you tell your parents?" he asked. "The truth, that I won't marry a man whose heart belongs to another." that I deserve more than being someone's second choice. You were never my second choice, Elizabeth. I really tried to love you the way you deserve. I know. And that's why I'm doing this now, before it's too late for both of us. At that moment, in the gazebo surrounded by century-old roses, a silent pact was sealed between two heirs of empires who for the first time chose to write their own stories, regardless of the consequences. James left the garden with a strange sensation of lightness and at the same time apprehension for what was to come. His cell phone rang. It was Emily. "Something happened," she said, without preamble. "Your parents are here." "What? At your house?" "Yes. They arrived half an hour ago without warning. They're sitting in my living room right now waiting for you." "I'm on my way," replied James, immediately heading for his car. The journey to Newport never seemed so long. 1,000 scenarios passed through James's mind, from an attempt by his parents to buy Emily's silence to a direct confrontation with the grandchildren they didn't know. Knowing his mother, any possibility seemed viable. When he finally arrived at Emily's house, he found a surprising scene. In the backyard, Richard Harrison was crouched beside Michael and Anthony, patiently, explaining how a small drone worked that he had apparently brought as a gift. Further away, Victoria and Sophia were seated at a small tea table while the girl awkwardly braided her grandmother's hair. Emily observed everything from the porch with a cautious but not hostile expression. "What's happening here?" asked James, approaching her. "Honestly, I'm not sure. They arrived with a van full of presents announcing they wanted to meet their grandchildren. I was so surprised I didn't know how to react." "They're being kind." "Surprisingly, yes. Your father fell in love with Michael and Anthony instantly. Your mother took a little longer to loosen up, but Sophia has a special way of breaking down resistance." James observed the scene with a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. Seeing his father, the always austere Richard Harrison, rolling on the grass with his grandchildren while demonstrating the drone controls, was an image he would never have imagined possible. "I'll talk to them," he decided, heading to the backyard. Upon seeing him, the children ran in his direction, eager to show the presents they had received. Michael waved a miniature replica of James's first racing car, a detail that only his father could know. Anthony held a compact telescope, perfect for feeding his curiosity about the cosmos, and Sophia proudly displayed a small digital camera suitable for her artistic inclinations. "Dad, look what we got! Grandpa and Grandma brought a lot of cool stuff," exclaimed Michael, using the word dad naturally, as if James had always been part of his life. The term Grandpa and Grandma caught James off guard. In less than 24 hours, his parents had apparently not only accepted the existence of their grandchildren, but also completely embraced the role of grandparents. "James, can we talk?" called Victoria, rising from the small table where she was with Sophia. Mother and son walked to a more secluded corner of the garden, observed from a distance by Emily, who maintained a vigilant eye on each interaction between her children and the Harrisons. "What does this mean, Mother? Yesterday you were trying to deny the existence of these children. Today you appear with presence and affection. What changed?" Victoria adjusted her hair, recently awkwardly braided by Sophia, and took a deep breath before responding. "Your father and I had a long conversation last night, the most sincere we've had in decades, actually. We realized that perhaps we have lost our way along the path, too focused on the Harrison legacy, on business, on appearances, and forgotten what really matters." "And what really matters according to the new version of Victoria Harrison?" asked James, still skeptical. "Family. The real family, not the version we invented to satisfy our ambitions." She looked at the grandchildren playing with Richard. "When your father saw the photos of the children that you showed, something changed in him. He saw you in them, saw himself, saw generations of Harrisons, and he realized he was about to lose something precious in the name of business agreements." "And you had the same epiphany?" Victoria smiled melancholically. "I'm a stubborn woman, James. You inherited that from me. It took me longer to accept, it's true, but your father asked me a question I couldn't answer. What will happen to the Harrison Empire when we're no longer here? Is it worth sacrificing the happiness of our only son and the chance to know our grandchildren for contracts and mergers? James studied his mother's face, looking for signs of manipulation or falsehood. Instead, he found something he had rarely seen: vulnerability, almost a silent request for forgiveness. "Elizabeth ended our engagement," he revealed. "She returned the ring this morning." To his surprise, Victoria didn't show the expected shock or indignation. "She came to us last night after you left. A remarkable young woman, I must admit. She said she wouldn't participate in a farce, that she deserved more, and that you also deserved it." "You didn't try to convince her otherwise?" "Of course we tried," admitted Victoria with a half-smile. "We are who we are, James, but she was unyielding, and in a way she made us see the situation from a new perspective." As they talked, Richard approached with the 3 grandchildren. The Harrison patriarch, normally so imposing in his impeccable suits, seemed a lighter and more relaxed version of himself, with his jacket abandoned on a chair and grass stains on the knees of his expensive pants. "James, we need to talk about the future," said Richard, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. "About how we integrate these wonderful children into our family, about how we reorganize the business, about how we repair the mistakes we made, and about how we explain the cancellation of the wedding to everyone," added Victoria. "That's on you," replied James firmly. "You created this problem. You can solve it." "Fair," agreed Richard, surprising his son with his immediate acceptance of responsibility. "I've already instructed our press office to prepare a statement. We'll cancel the ceremony, obviously, but keep the party to announce an even greater novelty: the discovery of 3 Harrison heirs who will bring new life and perspectives to the family." The proposal was so absurd, and at the same time so perfectly aligned with the Harrisons' strategic mentality, that James couldn't help but laugh. "You really plan to transform a family scandal into a social event?" "It's what we do best, son," replied Victoria, with a surprisingly complicit wink. Emily, who had been observing the scene from a distance, finally approached. "Excuse me for interrupting this family meeting, but I think I have some right to an opinion about the future of my children." Richard and Victoria turned to her with expressions that mixed respect and a certain embarrassment, something rare for the couple accustomed to dictating rules, not asking permission. "Certainly, Emily," agreed Richard. "In fact, we would like to invite you for dinner at the Imperial Estate tonight, to properly discuss the future, like civilized adults." "With the lawyers present, I imagine," replied Emily, with a touch of irony. "No lawyers," guaranteed Richard. "Just family, because, like it or not, we are all family now." The sun was beginning to set when the unlikely meeting in Emily's backyard finally ended. The Harrisons departed, promising to return later to pick up Emily for dinner, leaving James with her and the children. "What do you think?" he asked, while the triplets played with their new presents inside the house. "Of my parents' sudden change?" "Honestly, I'm suspicious," admitted Emily. "People don't change overnight, especially people like your parents, who have spent decades building a certain worldview. But I saw the way your father looked at the boys, how your mother melted when Sophia called her pretty grandma. There's something genuine there, as surprising as it may be." James nodded, perfectly understanding the mixture of hope and skepticism that Emily felt. "And what about us?" he asked, gently touching her hand. "There are 5 lost years we'll never recover, but what about the future?" Emily didn't withdraw her hand, but her look was cautious. "James, we have 3 children to think about now. We can't simply resume where we left off as if nothing had happened. I'm not suggesting that, I'm suggesting a new beginning, getting to know each other again, this time without interference, without lies between us." Before Emily could respond, Michael ran to the porch, interrupting the moment. "Dad, are you going to live with us now? Are you and Mom going to get married like in fairy tales?" The innocent question, so direct as only a child could make, left the adults momentarily speechless. James crouched down to be at his son's height. "Things are a bit more complicated than in fairy tales, Michael, but I promise I'll always be present in your lives no matter what happens." "But you love Mom, don't you? That's what princes do in stories. They love princesses." James looked at Emily, whose flushed face betrayed her embarrassment at her son's direct question. "Yes, Michael, I love your mother. I always have." The words, simple and direct, hung in the air of the ending afternoon. Emily felt something awaken in her chest, not the youthful and overwhelming love of 5 years ago, but something deeper, more mature, forged through difficulties and separations. "We'll figure this out together," she finally said, allowing herself a small smile, one day at a time. That night, when the Harrisons returned to pick them up for dinner at the Imperial Estate, it wasn't just Emily who accompanied them, but also the triplets, dressed in their best clothes, eager to know the coffee castle from the stories their mother told. The Imperial Estate, with its lights on and gates open, seemed different now, no longer a symbol of exclusion and elitism, but a place that could perhaps become a home for a reinvented family. In the great dining room, where generations of Harrisons had celebrated weddings, births, and strategic alliances, a new story was beginning to be written. A story not determined by rigid traditions or social expectations, but by conscious choices and the courage to face the truth, no matter how inconvenient it might be. And while the triplets explored in wonder the corridors of the old mansion, discovering family relics and stories of ancestors that were also part of their heritage, James and Emily found a moment of privacy on the veranda overlooking the coffee plantations, illuminated by the moon. "You know what's funny?" said Emily, observing the silver-green sea of plantations under the moonlight. "I came here intending to cause a scandal at your wedding, to expose painful truths, to make you and your family face the consequences of your actions. And you ended up achieving exactly that, just in a completely different way than you planned," completed James with a smile. "Life has a peculiar sense of humor," she agreed. "Maybe it's the universe correcting a mistake, rewriting a story that shouldn't have been interrupted." Emily turned to face him, her expression serious. "I have no illusions, James. Your parents may be accepting the situation now, but they are still who they are. There will be challenges, conflicts, differences in values and expectations." "No, a doubt," he agreed. "But this time we'll face them together. We won't allow anyone, not even my parents, to come between us again." As if to seal that promise, James leaned in and kissed Emily softly. A kiss that carried not only the warmth of feelings that had survived years of separation, but also the promise of a future built on more honest and solid foundations. Inside the house, surrounded by a family that was just beginning to truly know each other, 3 innocent children had inadvertently provoked a revolution in the controlled universe of the Harrisons, and in their wake, old certainties crumbled, giving way to new possibilities never before considered. The truth, for so long buried under layers of convenience and tradition, had finally come to light, and as often happens when truth emerges, it brought with it not only pain and confrontation, but also the chance for healing and renewal. The prince of the coffee castle, the empire of beans, the commoner from the historic town, the story that Emily told her children before bed now gained a new chapter. A chapter not written by traditions or external expectations, but by the transformative power of love and truth. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily and James's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here, clicking to the left. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of life and human relationships. Don't miss our upcoming content. We're eager to read your comments.